What's up, y'all, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Destiny Janae, aka your favorite astrology weather woman, or astrologer as some people call us. And today we're here to address retrograde ships. Because baby, touch my hand when I say this. That is not your boo. Maybe. I don't know your situation, but you can figure it out if you just keep watching this video. Shout out to my dream journal before we get into the full video, because my dream journal has over 4 months worth of entries, and it literally gives you the space to decode your dreams, like what they usually mean spiritually, but also what they mean to you specifically. And I know during retrogrades, it's very easy to be dreaming about an ex, to be dreaming about specific people that you want to talk to. Dream journal, babes. You don't need to send the text, just write it down. With that being said, let's get into the video. So what is a retrograde ship? Honestly, it sounds like what it is. You know, it's a relationship or situationship that you get into or start dancing around during a retrograde. You know, sometimes it can be a Mercury retrograde, Venus retrograde, Mars retrograde, doesn't matter. Each of these kind of have their own different nuance to the type of retrograde ships that they produce, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But really, a retrograde ship is just like, the math doesn't really math on why you should be with this person. You normally wouldn't be with them. You normally wouldn't reach out to them. A lot of time your retrograde ship is going to be a past person. Maybe you guys had unfinished business, you guys didn't properly get closure, and I have closure in parentheses because closure does not matter. Sometimes it is a new person, and sometimes you're kind of clinging to them. You're kind of clinging to the relationship out of a need for familiarity because there's too much changing around you. But inherently, all retrograde ships have in common the fact that they don't always last, and they almost always feel like a fever dream after the fact. So why is that? You know, retrogrades they're just a different type of mindset. You know, inherently, symbolically, when a planet is going retrograde, or it appears to go retrograde from our perspective on Earth, that has a lot of spiritual significance. And the significance is that we're being asked to reconsider something. For example, if you're driving in a car, you're going somewhere, right? It doesn't make sense to keep driving if you don't know where you're going. And what's the point of driving somewhere if you don't know why you're going there? So I think that's the whole point of retrogrades, is it kind of puts your life into perspective, and it kind of redirects you onto a better path, even though retrogrades feel weird as fuck when you're in the middle of them, but like usually by the halfway point they'll start making some sense whenever you're reconsidering who you are. Like, especially if it's a retrograde that's hitting your sun, your moon, your rising, these like pivotal points of you and who you are. Like, it makes a lot of sense that you would go like crawling back to an ex, or like jumping into a new relationship with someone, or like really just spending a lot of intimate, maybe even sexual time with someone to kind of distract yourself from all of the really intense shifts that are going on around you and within your mind. Retrogrades are definitely a period of changing your mind. The planet is technically weakened because its motivations are confused. You know, the reason why it wants to do things are confused. You know, more often than not, whenever we're thinking about Mercury retrograde shifts, it's usually because you wanted to have some sort of conversation. Usually the Mercury retrograde ships are someone from your past, and usually it's like conversation that you guys never really got to have, or like issues that you never really got to hash out with each other. There was usually some sort of ending, and it's kind of being brought back up. Or usually, like, if you broke up with someone during like the Mercury retrograde shadow period, why might be a bit more confused, and like during the retrograde you guys might be getting into the meat and potatoes of like why you actually broke up in the first place. You know, sometimes it's just like a mindset shift when it comes to the Mercury retrogrades. Like, literally, Mercury is the planet of logic, it's the planet of communication, and so whenever your logic is fucked up and whenever the communication is fucked up, it's like you're a lot more likely to get on a merry-go-round that's going nowhere, even though it feels like you are, because the logic, the math isn't mathing. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, maybe that person's not the best person to be in your field, it's not the best person for you in your life, but during the retrograde it makes sense because it's a whole different mindset. And I think that's where like a lot of that post retrograde clarity will come in, and you'll be like, why the fuck did I just do that? Me included, I've done this before for sure, many times, but it's that feeling of like, why the fuck did I like get back involved with them, or like, why the fuck would I get involved with this person when I have all of these things going on? And yeah, usually with the Mercury ones, it's like, you know, something in your logic is shifting, something in the way that you think the way that you speak and see the world and are willing to communicate with the world, that's usually the root of the Mercury retrograde ships. Now, the Venus ones have a little bit more nuance, right? Because Venus is the planet of love. And so I think this is the most significant type of retrograde ship that you want to pay attention to, because whenever Venus is retrograde, she's inherently changing her values. You know, what you look like might be changing, you know, your style might be changing, the money that you spend, how you make your money might be changing, but especially your taste in lovers is going to shift. And you know, retrogrades do deal with the past quite a bit. So yes, past people are very likely to be in your life during Venus retrogrades. Even if you're not like talking to them, they might just be on your mind a lot more. Your relationship to love and all of the things that, you know, feed into love, like your type, your physical type, your emotional type, the types of conversations that you want to have with your partners, you know, the kind of sex that you want to have with your partners, like all of this is under construction. And it's like when you don't really have a good idea yet of what you want, you're going to be a lot more likely to explore. And so sometimes you'll, you know, go for someone who is completely not your type, someone you used to not like, or you might go for someone who was your type in the past and you're kind of realizing they're not your thing anymore. But another thing too though is that Venus retrogrades are infamously responsible for infidelity in relationships, or at least exposing infidelity in relationships. And so a lot of these Venus retrograde ships, they are cheating scandals. They are people who are birthing, you know, relationships from, you know, tattered relationships. Like people, the mindset here is that like, okay, this relationship that I'm in isn't really working for me, or, you know, I'm lacking something in this relationship, so people will go out and they'll cheat, or they'll just get these urges to explore the type that they want. Like they'll get the urge to explore their new type and kind of, you know, just step outside of relationships that way. You know, Venus retrogrades have this tendency to bring like a new flavor, or you'll start seeing something new in maybe someone who was old, someone from your past, or vice versa. Like you might go searching for someone who is like your past, because you might have realized a certain trait that you want in a partner that this new person might have. You know, then whenever we get into the Mars retrograde ships, these have a bit more of a sexual charge to them. You know, Mars can of course deal with conflict, it can deal with your enemies, it can deal with your career, your overall motivations, but most specifically when we're talking about relationships, we're talking about your sexuality. And so this is where your sexuality is on the table to be examined. You know, you're going to be a lot more likely to explore yourself sexually with, you know, partners that maybe from the past. They may be people that you wouldn't usually want to explore yourself sexually with. It's kind of like wanting to clear up the beef, but then once you get involved with the beef with a past person or whoever, it's kind of realizing why you had beef in the first place. And that, you know, this is definitely why a lot of Mars retrograde ships don't always work. You know, something about the exchange of energy is off during Mars retrogrades. Your sexual choices, your sexual partners aren't going to be super solid. And Mars retrograde ships also have this like tinge of like conflict behind them. Usually they'll be out of an attempt to resolve some sort of conflict, but maybe it doesn't always go super well. And so I think retrograde ships have this tendency to like be more or self-sabotaging or just very significant when there's a retrograde somewhere close to one of your personal placements. If you're having a retrograde that's on your sun or your rising sign, like literally the DNA of who you are and what you want in this life is changing. So it's like you might be clinging for some sort of comfort during all of this confusion. You know, if you're having a retrograde that's right on your own Mercury, the very fabric of the way that you think and the way that you look at the world and the logic and the connections that you make between things, that's also changing. So, you know, I think it's easy to like turn your brain off and just let the retrograde ship do its thing, you know, just kind of escape into that to kind of get away from some of these deep questions that we might be running from, especially when we're having a Mercury retrograde that's on our own Mercury. Whenever we have retrogrades that are like on your Venus sign particularly, or if it's making an aspect to your Venus, it's like what you want romantically and the way that you express yourself romantically, the types of lovers that you take on, like all of this is changing. A retrograde that's going to be on your Venus, like at the end of your life, or you know, at some point in the future, you're gonna look back at that moment and be like, whoa, like that's when my love life changed. That's when I started picking different partners, whether it be for the better or for the worse. Having some sort of retrograde that's literally on your Mars might kind of irritate your life quite a bit. Your motivation might be off. You might, you know, deal with a lot more self-confidence issues too around that time. And you know, with the low self-confidence also comes with you putting up with things that you wouldn't usually put up with, or kind of just accepting less than what you know you're worth. I also think that can be very common for like sun and rising sign retrogrades too. But I think like what I'm trying to say here is like I didn't make this video because I want you to feel ashamed, because at the end of the day, like every relationship serves its purpose. Every interaction you have with someone is kind of building you towards, you know, maybe even a better future. Maybe there's a lesson that you need to learn or something. But now let's get into the telltale signs of how to know if you're in a retrograde ship. And I think the first one is obvious. You know, if you guys started talking during a retrograde shadow period, particularly Mercury, Venus, or Mars. If you guys got in contact during the retrograde, if you guys kind of went to the next level, whether that be like kissing, or if you're having sex, or if you're going out on dates, like you may have started talking before any retrograde shit came up, but like if you were kind of moving into the next level during a retrograde, that's kind of like a telltale sign that you're in some sort of retrograde ship. If you're making commitment to each other during a retrograde, also another sign of the retrograde ship. But I do want to state that not all retrograde ships are this inherent nasty, like horrible thing that you're doing, you know. Like I've noticed that like people who naturally have a Venus retrograde or Mercury retrograde or some sort of retrograde naturally in their natal chart, they actually have huge milestones during retrogrades. Like for example, I have a cousin who was born under Venus retrograde in Capricorn, and I specifically remember going to his wedding, and it was a Venus retrograde in Capricorn in the sky. You know, he was going through his Venus return, not only just a Venus return, but it was retrograde, like exactly how it was when he was born. He got married under that. If you naturally have retrogrades in your chart, I don't want you to like be scared of these retrograde shifts, because I think retrogrades for you are just going to represent more of an important time in your life. For whatever that is. So for example, if you naturally have Mercury retrograde in your chart, and then Mercury retrograde is making an aspect to your own Mercury or something, or it's in the same sign as your own Mercury, maybe, you know, something might be changing in your education, or if, like, you know, your whole perspective on life might change. You know, you might read some sort of life-changing book. Like, you know, retrogrades don't always have to be this huge horrible thing. Like, just because things are under renovation doesn't mean that what happened was bad. Like, for me, I've had many retrograde ships, baby, like, and like if I could go back, I probably wouldn't change anything, because a lot of the lessons that I've learned from that retrograde ship were just, they were necessary for me to have, you know, like it was needed for me. And so that's why I try not to look at retrograde ships with such a like horrible lens, but I do now try to objectively look at it for like what it is. It's like, come on, like you're probably running from something, especially if you don't have any retrograde planets in your chart natally. There might be something that you're running from. There might be something that you're kind of scared to address. There might be some sort of huge change that you're a little scared of. And I think it's okay. Like, I think it's okay to be scared of like change. You know, life, the only constant in life is change. And so, you know, whatever it is that you need to do to cope, I don't want to enable you or anything, but you know if you're in a retrograde ship, you know if it's good or not. Like, you know inherently if it's good for you or if it's not good for you. And so like what I'm saying is, like, I can't tell you to leave or not. I can't tell you to like leave that person alone. I can't tell you if you should make that contact, because I think, you know, chances are if you're watching this video, you're probably a grown-ass adult. You probably know whatever the hell you're doing. You probably know the repercussions of, you know, getting in touch with someone who hurt you deeply in the past. You probably know the repercussions of, you know, leading someone on if you're on that side of the story. So it's like, you know, use your discernment. If you're running from something, you know, maybe you might want to think about exactly what it is you're running from, because at the end of the day, the retrograde ship is not going to save you from the issues that the retrograde is trying to address in your life. Like, if there's a retrograde in your 4th house of family or something, and something is going on with your living situation, like you might be moving or like considering moving, or you might be like having some odd energy exchange with your family members, distracting yourself with a retrograde ship is not going to fix the family shit that you need to address. You know, retrograde ships, they can make the retrograde easier, but they can also complicate it a lot because they can bring up old feelings. They can kind of make you think the past is now. They can, you know, you can kind of confuse what's what, especially during the Mercury retrogrades, because the logic is just not, it's not logicking. It's like, at the end of the day, leave, don't leave, I don't know, that's not my business. Look, you now have the tools to identify what a retrograde ship is. You know the repercussions. Chances are, if you don't have a retrograde planet in your chart, it may not last very well. You know, there's probably going to be some sort of clarity, but at the end of the day, you have free will, babes. That is just the bottom line. So let me know down in the comments if you've ever been in a retrograde ship, if you keep seeing the same person, if you keep falling into the same patterns during your retrograde ships, what was going on, where was the retrograde in your chart, what was happening in your real life, why did you feel the need to cling to a retrograde ship, how did you know you needed to leave? Like, give me all the tea in the comments down below. And also, while you're there, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I love y'all so much, and I'm wishing y'all all the best on your retrograde ships. And after I make this video, I am very sure that I will have another retrograde ship at some point in my life. You know, they're just natural. They come with the retrograde territory. So with that being said, I love y'all. Be careful. All is well. Bye.